Today we're here to discuss Ruchira Gupta's book, I Kick and I Fly. It's a brilliant cover, and that's not the best part about the book. Ruchira Gupta, as some of you may know, has won an Emmy. Around 20 years ago, she started an NGO that has done some seriously good work in the area of sex trafficking, and she has helped put away many bad guys, including the villain of this book that we're talking about today. Ruchira knows that 9 to 13 is the average age of girls trafficked in India. And she has always wondered why we don't talk to younger people about trafficking. I Look and I Fly is her answer. It's a young adult book, but everyone should read it. I don't know how many books I've read in this genre. It's a genre that Ruchika refers to as fast-paced social justice adventure. Its 14-year-old protagonist, Hira, is the most uplifting Indian character I have encountered in a book this year. She's named after Wahida Rehman's character in the film Teesri Kasam, and there's a story around that, and if we have time, we'll get into it. Hira comes from a family of Pehlwans. She lives in Forbesganj, Bihar, on the border of India and Nepal, and she fights too easily. She's the first in her family to wear canvas shoes, even if she has found them discarded by the railway track. She's from the marginalized Nut community and dismissed by many as being a community of thieves and prostitutes. Ruchira's story and Hira's story is a story about how Hira's destiny changes after she discovers Kung Fu. So, Ruchira, you told me earlier this year that Kung Fu gives Hira a new ending. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yes. So, first of all, I want to just tell you that it's a big honor for me to be in conversation with Priya Ramani, who herself is a bold and feisty journalist and has stood up to injustices through her work, through her writing, and through her lived experiences. So she embodies the spirit of girls like Hira, who's a 14-year-old girl in my book. She's the main protagonist. She's about to be sold into the sex trade when the cattle fair comes to town, when a women's rights advocate enrolls her into a Kung Fu program. And through the practice of Kung Fu, she discovers the power of her body and learns to fight for it. And to answer your question, Priya, that what is it that is about Hira, which is the reason that I have written this book. I think the reason that I wrote this book and what is it about Hira, as many of you know, Hira means diamond. My character is a rough diamond. She's a diamond who's like a piece of rock in the dirt, and all she needs is a little bit of polishing. And with that polishing, she can change her end. So nobody has to be downtrodden, nobody has to be oppressed, but to be getting out of that situation of class and caste, everyone needs a little help. And this is what my book is about, that how women come together, how a community comes together, how a government which has systems in place but which the poor and downtrodden cannot access, they come together so that Hira's destiny can change, so that she is not sold into the sex trade. And Kung Fu plays a part in it, but also the ecosystem around Hira. And that is how Hira changes her end. So the book is also about an ecosystem, and that there is nothing more powerful than a community coming together around what it cares about. And to answer the second part of your question, there's a very famous writer from my region, Bihar. His name is Fanishwarnath Renu, and he actually lived in Forbesganj in my home. And he wrote many of his stories in Maithili and in a sub-dialect of Maithili called Theti. And those stories are sometimes set in the red light area that my NGO now works in. And Laltain Bazaar, as it's called, a rough translation of red light district. And the most famous character of one of his stories, Mare Gaye Gulfam, was a woman called Hira Bai, who then became iconic as Wahida Rahman in the film with Raj Kapoor, Tisri Kasam. And Hirabai and Hiraman, who's Raj Kapoor, they fall in love. But, the cattle fair has to move on, and Hirabai is a dancer, and she has to go away with the cattle fair. And even though Raj Kapoor falls in love with her, he can't do anything about it. So his third vow is never fall in love with a girl from the Nautanki. And in my book, Hira changes her hand at the end of her own life and takes control of her destiny. So she doesn't have to go away with the cattle fair. She goes back to school.
And tell us a little more about this reality that the book is based on, this place where women are treated worse than cattle, as you say in your book.
So when the British took over India, they passed a law called the Criminal Tribe Act. Now, what was this? They basically wanted all our resources. They wanted the forests for the World War because they wanted timber. They wanted to replace made in India products with made in England products. So they wanted to sell even dairy products like milk and cheese and all of that, which nomadic tribes used to make, as they traveled from the hills with their goat and sheep and sell it in the plains. They also wanted to replace engineering skills, which many of the nomadic tribes had. To make bridges with rope, etc. And also medicines. They used to make indigenous medicine from the forest products. So they wanted to replace that with GlaxoSmithKline, Caventers for the dairy products. And so they basically banned these tribes from either making, manufacturing, or trading in their products. And under the Criminal Tribe Act, they also banned them from moving from one place to the other, even at night. So these groups had to report into British authorities and landlords at midnight and at 4 in the morning. So the community that I write about is one such community. They are known as the Nuts. And they were traditionally nomads. They used to come down from the hills to the plains every year with their sheep and goats, sell dairy products, make rope bridges because they had to cross ravines, etc. And they were also pehelwans and champions and all of that. But with this labeling under the Criminal Tribe Act as criminals, they lost their land, they lost their livelihood, they lost their housing. They also lost their dignity. They were made to squat in the land belonging to landlords and British authorities along railway tracks. And very soon they became so marginalized that the men were forced to do the most menial chores for everyone, and the women had to be sexually available. And slowly over the years, there's something called intergenerational prostitution that began to be passed down from mother to daughter and pimping from father to son. And when India became independent, we did get rid of the Criminal Tribe Act. So it was through a process known as denotified. But also what happened was the stigma and discrimination remained. And upper caste gangs still continued to dominate these formally denotified tribes, to the point that they still live along railway tracks, they are still squatters, intergenerational prostitution is still pushed on them. If anyone tries to escape, there's extreme violence. I know through my own NGO, Apne Aap, the work that I do, that one of the women who tried to escape prostitution in the small town in Forbisganj in Bihar, in Lalteen Bazaar, her father's ears were chopped off. And she was locked up in a room and kept for 1 week, gang raped by a lot of men, upper caste men, saying that, do not try to take your destiny back in your own hands. And when I began working in Lalteen Bazaar in that area, this is 20 years ago, I was told by the DM and the police, Ruchira ji, nothing can be done for this community. They all are pimps and thieves and prostitutes. So why do you even bother? And then when I started a school for this community, the townspeople opposed me. They said, you should have a separate school for the children of prostitutes, because why should you mix them up with this other town children? And so I had to overcome all of that. And then the community itself has very low self-worth, because they've been so crushed for so long, they don't have any memory of their origins. They believe they are meant to be now pimps and thieves and prostitutes, and if they oppose their destiny, they will be punished. And there are passages in my book about that. So it's a bit like, how do you take on all this? If you're a 14-year-old girl who's born in a mud hut, your father's working for the local crime lord, who supplies the girls to the traveling mela, Your mother's breaking stones on the highway. There are 4 kids, no food at home. And how do you overcome that? So actually, my book is based on true life stories because I show how you overcome that.
How did you find the joy in this bleak story? Because it is a horrible story, but there is a lot of joy in the book.
I find the joy in the work that I do because I see the resilience and the strength and the humanity in the community that I work with. I find the joy in the strength of the mothers who organize to fight for their daughters to go to school against all the odds that I've just described to you. I find joy in the successes of the girls, the girl by girl. And for me, I really began writing this book. I've written it as fiction, but it's based on true life, as I mentioned. I began writing the book when a girl, just like Hira, won a gold medal in karate in my NGO. And suddenly everything began to change because her family thought they were worth something when she came home with the gold medal. And also the people in school stopped bullying her, the teachers began to respect her, and she was a first generation learner, not good at studies, but suddenly she began to respect herself because she had won a gold medal. She was Hira. And so that began to change her own sense of what her destiny could be, and everything began to change. And other mothers also came forward and said that we now will fight for our daughters. So, there are different pivotal moments when change begins, and this was the pivotal moment that I've marked. And I was very influenced when I began working, and I used to face challenges in my work with, traffickers jumping over the school walls or kidnapping our girls, etc., or even putting a knife at my throat. I used to think, what am I doing? Am I disrupting the status quo? And I have nothing better to offer. And I would think very often about U.R. Anantmurthy, who was a very close friend of my uncle's. I'd read his book, Anantpura. And how he causes disruption in the community, and then what, So I was determined that I will learn from the book and go further.
That's fabulous. And tell us about the villain of the book. I believe he is in jail right now.
So one of the strategies in our NGO was that, not only will we educate the girls, but we will organize the women to access their rights and entitlements, as I call them, from the government, low-cost food, low-cost housing, and all of that. But at the same time, the women and the girls could not go to school or access their rights if the traffickers were living in the same mud huts as them or on the same dirt strip that they were living in, if there was no protection. Accountability was key to what I was doing, because otherwise the traffickers were beating up the women and girls black and blue, raping them, drugging them, kidnapping them. I can't even and even to our staff members, they would attack our community center, steal the light bulbs, steal the fans, anything we left there. So we were determined that we have to hold those who were buying and selling these human beings accountable, because we had to disrupt the normalization of exploitation. And to do that time there were no laws in India which would punish traffickers. They were only punishing the women by picking them up and putting them into the jail for soliciting in a public place. So we had to first lobby to change the laws with the UN, then after we succeeded at the UN, then run around in India, and finally when the Jyoti Singh Pandey rape happened, we were able to cluster a law called Section 370.
Thank you for not saying Nirbhaya.
Never, because I think it is silencing of the courage of her fighting back and silencing of our movement. And we face a lot of gaslighting and silencing, as you know. So that rape happened, and we pushed through to get Section 370 of the IPC, which would punish traffickers. And luckily, that mood was right, and we managed to do it. And using that law, then we began to go to police stations and courts in Bihar and start filing police complaints against traffickers. The mothers did it on behalf of their daughters, women did it on behalf of themselves. And we were actually able to put the trafficking overlord, Ravi Lala, his name was, in jail, and another, his henchman, was a man called Gainul. And they are both life imprisonment, and their houses stand abandoned. And the red light area that I began working in, there were 72 brothels there, mud huts. The front room is where the family lives, and the back room is the brothel. And behind that is the Mela ground. So they would actually, those 72 brothels now, the children are all in school and college, and the women have taken over those mud huts and turned them into real homes and the back rooms for their businesses, tea shops, masala shops, orchestra parties, etc. And the traffickers are in jail. So now we have only 2 mud huts, which are brothels, and it's through the empowerment of the entire community and holding the traffickers accountable. It is very important.
And women led the way.
Yeah, women led the way. That's the strongest theme in my book, is the leadership of women. And they are powerless, and yet they find power by finding strength in each other and organizing in small groups.
And one of the successes of Apne Aap is the way you guys have managed to help them access schemes and rights due to them, right? Can you talk a bit about that? Because there are all these girl child and schemes for the marginalized and all, but I don't know how many people are able to access these schemes.
Absolutely. One of the things is that, I live in 2 cultures. I live in India and I live in America. And in both places, I find that there's a group which has begun to exist which doesn't understand hunger and homelessness and the notion of what I call the last girl, which is a concept very much influenced by Gandhiji, who spoke about uplift of the last. And to me, the 13-year-old in a brothel is that last girl because she is not just poor, she's female. And on top of that, she's from an oppressed caste. And then she's a teenager. So all these intersecting inequalities cut her off from access to food, to clothing, to shelter, even to legal protection, because the police will not show up for her. The courts will not take her side if she speaks up. The teachers discriminate against her. So everything is wrong, wrong, wrong. And how is she even able to go to school? Because we often blame the poor and we say, oh, they drop out of school, they are not regular, they fight. But we don't notice that they are hungry and their roof may be leaking and they may have fever, and therefore they didn't come to school, or they may not even have a second set of clothes. So the government entitlements that are in place are very, very critical to the last person being able to access things that we think will pull them out of poverty. But very often the poor don't even know how to access it. How do you access low-cost food? How do you access low-cost housing? How do you access healthcare? Even if it exists for you. And this begins from the fact that most of them are undocumented. And they don't even have caste certificates. So our entire program to help Hira, I describe how we actually had to fight for all of these things, how to fill up a form, something which we take for granted to get a caste certificate. Then if you go to the office to get the ID card, then how do you have the courage to speak up in that office to government authorities or to bank authorities? So all of this is described as a very fast-paced social justice adventure. So I've made it really like a thriller, the book. And it begins with Hira, who is bullied in school. She's fighting to take an egg home from the midday meal scheme.
Talking about eggs in midday meal schemes, how important are they? And they've been discontinued in so many states.
It's the worst thing possible, and that's why I think this book is really important for parents, teachers, and young people to read, because they have to realize that, if they are hungry, or, this is an extreme situation, but if you're facing body shaming and bullying in school, you are not crazy. The system is crazy. And so the system is becoming crazier, which is not understanding that we are talking about GDP and growth and all of that, but we are cutting out even midday meal schemes for kids. If they don't get food in school, how are they going to concentrate in class, and how will they become those human beings who can fulfill their full potential? So the idea of the cutting of what in India is called the welfare state is the most brutal idea possible, because it is going to create more and more inequality. In parliamentary answers last year, I read somewhere that 21 million people have slipped below the poverty line. And so, we can say there's education, there's school, there's this, there's that, but you have to create the building blocks for all of this. And that is the welfare state.
And tell us a bit about how when you realized the magnitude of the sex trafficking problem India faces.
That's a story, yes. So, you know, I used to be a journalist just like Priya and many others in the room. And I was quite disgusted with some stuff which had happened in Delhi. You know, this was just the rise of what we call a kind of polarized vigilantism in India at that time. And so I had resigned from my TV and magazine place and pushed off to Nepal. I was hiking in the hills of Nepal and I stumbled upon rows of villages which had missing girls. And I asked the men who were drinking tea and playing cards where the girls were. And they said that, don't you know they all are in Mumbai? And that answer changed my life because I followed the trail and I found little girls locked up in small rooms for years, being exploited by multiple men. And some of the girls were on display in cages. I'm talking about 1996. And I was shocked, I was angry, I was depressed that a smooth supply chain existed of human beings in my country, my generation, my time. And I wanted to do something about it. Of course, the first response was to tell the story. And so I ended up making a documentary called The Selling of Innocence. And for those who want to watch it, it's not on Netflix. It's on my website, ruchiragupta.com. And I then made the documentary and I won an Emmy for outstanding investigative journalism for it. And when I was on stage in New York in the Broadway Marquis Hotel, I could not, you know, when I was looking out beyond the bright lights, I could only see the eyes of the mothers who had broken their silence because they wanted a different future for their daughters. So I decided in that moment that I'm going to use my Emmy and my film not to build a career in journalism, but to make a difference. So I stepped off the stage and the first thing I did was turn around to the woman who'd given me the award. That time she was US Secretary of State and I said, I want to change laws, it's a system, I want this, I want that. And she built connections and I was able to contribute by showing the film and testifying at the US Senate and the UN for the passage of the UN Protocol to End Trafficking in Persons and the first US law on trafficking, Trafficking Victim Protection Act. So I didn't let, and I came back to Mumbai with my award and I sat with the women on a straw mat inside the red light district, Kamtipura, which many of you know about. And I asked them, I said, okay, I've done my job, I've told your story, broken the silence. And they said, that's not enough. They said that we want to educate our children. I said, listen, I don't know how to do anything. I'm just a journalist. I'm not a doctor, social worker, lawyer. They said, but you have money and you have access to, you know English, you have access to money and network, so you can do this. I said, what do you want? They had 4 dreams. The first dream was they wanted school for their children. The second dream was they wanted a job in an office. And if you saw the brothels of Bombay, that would seem so unlikely to you. But to them, it meant safety, it meant old age pension, it meant fixed monthly income, dignity. The third thing they wanted was a room of their own. And I'm an English literature student, so I was Virginia Woolf in the brothels of Mumbai. And I said, what does that mean? You know, so they said, where a customer cannot walk in any time, where our children who are playing on the floor when the customers come will be safe because it will be my own room. And I understood. And the fourth thing they said was punishment of their perpetrators. And they said those who have brokered away our dreams by buying us and selling us. So those dreams became my business plan. And the first thing we did was rented a room, hired a teacher, and started educating the kids. Fast forward, we have helped more than 20,000 women exit systems of prostitution. And help more than 3,000 children from red light areas finish school and college and still continuing.
And have you seen, has the nature of trafficking changed over the past 2 decades?
Yeah, so trafficking, of course, you know, people will tell you that prostitution is inevitable and, you know, it's as old as the hills. And, you know, they'll say, oh, it's the oldest profession. So I always tell them, no, it's not the oldest profession because it can't be older than farming and hunting because people had to eat first. And this is a very glib thing which has been trotted out, again, to normalize exploitation because it's the oldest oppression. And the other thing is that we also wanted to make sure that not only we denormalize culturally this thinking, but also make sure that we change laws and policies which will change the system entirely. And it's been very, very hard, as you know, Priya. We've had conversations about this before. That in a culture where the market prevails completely, where everything is all right when you pay for it, how do you talk about the dignity of the human being? Because many people will come and tell us that, oh, somebody paid for it, she's smiling. But the happy hooker has a lot of pain and trauma. And so I always say that prostitution is absence of choice. It's not a choice. And until we understand that, any struggle we have, understand the value of a woman's body, any struggle that we have is bound to fail, because after all, the one thing we must understand is that it's at home that we normalize hierarchy first. Because as soon as we are born, we understand it's all right for one class of human beings to order and one to obey, one to get paid for their work and one not to get paid for their work, one to seek approval and one to give approval. So gender digs a trench into our brain into which all other hierarchies fall, and we think hierarchy itself is normal. So when we go out into the world, we accept the hierarchy of caste, of class, everything else, and we begin to vote for the strong man, the head of the state, who looks like the head of the family, and whatever decision he takes is right or wrong. So until we can uproot hierarchy, the sense of normalization between women and men, we won't be able to uproot any other hierarchy. So the struggle is much deeper, and the understanding of exploitation is also much, much deeper. Until we go there, we won't be able to do anything else.
I think we've run out of time, Ruchira. Thank you so much for this brilliant book that you've written, which has so many themes close to my heart: girls and sport, taking on the patriarchy, women leading the way, the power of collective action, so many things. I'm so glad that while we were gardening and brain fogging during COVID, you were busy working and writing this book.